himself because I'm sure he can do a better job at it than I can. But Harvey, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, well, hi all. It's great to be part of this this much delayed workshop, and great to be with you all and see some longtime friends and a lot of new faces as well. So I was very honored when Lori asked me to address this group, and in the year that has transpired, the pandemic year, it turns out that some of us at the museum were offered a very attractive buyout. So I have retired effective December 31st. And so I do bear the title of Ambassador Emeritus, but you know, I've been enjoying doing a lot of birding and a lot of hiking and things not related to a daily grind. And my wife on the 31st of December got me a t-shirt, and the t-shirt said, "Retired 2020, quote, not my problem anymore," unquote. And she was just referencing the fact that in all the years that she'd known me and that we've been married, there wasn't one vacation that wasn't interrupted by a phone call from the museum saying, "We've had this animal crisis. This animal's sick. We have to do that. This person left our employ," or something like that. So it's great to know that the Perkins Wildlife Center and the live animals at the museum are in great hands. Those of you who know Jim Nemeth, long time of the Cleveland Zoo, and then SeaWorld before that, is the director of wildlife now. And I think he's doing a fabulous job of taking over and brings a wealth of animal training and programming experience. So that'll be kind of cool. So I'm going to try and get my PowerPoint up. So let's see if this works. Okay, and I want to do this. So, and I want to start my slideshow from the beginning. Okay, and let's have at it. Now, when Lori and I talked a year ago or more about doing this program, you know, one of the things was, well, last year was the 50th anniversary of the Perkins Wildlife Center. And that's the thing that I've been most intimately involved with in my 46-year career at the museum. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe it's an opportunity to sort of do an overview of that. But I wanted to provide some context too, because this is also, as you can see on the screen, the 100th anniversary of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. We were founded in 1920. At least our articles of incorporation were inked in 1920. And so the two auspicious years coincided. And so one of the things that people always ask is sort of, you know, what's the deal about the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and why do you have live animals, and what gives? So I guess a starting point is a dinosaur, particularly this dinosaur. This is Haplocanthosaurus Delphi. This is a big sauropod dinosaur that we have on display at the museum. It was actually discovered by museum staffers back in the early 1950s. Great story. The museum director is sitting in his office thinking, my gosh, we're going to be moving into a museum, new museum out in University Circle, but we don't have any dinosaurs. You know, we need a dinosaur. So he hires a college kid, Ed Delphs, and gives him the keys to the museum truck and 3 high school interns and says, go west, find a dinosaur. And unbelievably, they do so out in Canyon City, Colorado. And Haplocanthosaurus Delphi is the oldest and largest and most complete skeleton of the Haplocanthosaurus genus, named for Ed Delphs, and it's the only one that is fully articulated and on display. So we're quite proud of that. But I will say that a lot of people think, okay, well, that's what a museum of natural history is all about. It's all about the history of nature. It's all about those things that came before us. And though, you know, it's important to examine the past to understand the present, to imagine the future. But most folks think that a natural history museum is just fully rooted in the past. And we certainly have a lot of things from the past, This is Dunkleosteus torelli, and Dunkleosteus torelli is a giant armored arthrodire fish. Arthrodire means joint-necked. So he actually has ball and socket joints on either side of the opening that you see behind the cranium, between the cranium and that sort of shoulder shield that you see there. And this was, we think, one of the largest predatory animals on planet Earth 363 million years ago in the shallow Devonian Sea that once covered Ohio. And it turns out in the Cleveland member of the Ohio Shale, which underlies much of the city of Cleveland and the eastern part of the state, the finest specimens of these late Devonian arthrodires as well as sharks are found. And Dunkleosteus torelli is the largest. And again, we've got some complete head shields. It was named for Dr. David Dunkel, who used to be our paleontologist at the museum, and Jay Terrell, who was a hotel owner out in what is now Sheffield Lake, and actually found the first bones of this. Originally, it was labeled as, it was named Dinichthys, terrible fish. And in the black and white, you see Peter Bungert, the great preparator and paleontologist at the museum, who had to assemble all of the pieces and sometimes crack them to bring back the curved shape of the bones so that the skull made sense. And we had an understanding of how this thing actually operated. And I'm very, very pleased to say that on December 21st, Governor Mike DeWine signed a bill, Senate Bill 123, that names Dunkleosteus torelli as the official, get that, state fossil fish. So this is now one of the icons of the state of Ohio. But it brings us to that question of what is natural history? And this is one pass at it. I think of it as, at its heart, natural history is the close observation and examination of the natural world, trying to identify its parts and components, exploring and trying to understand its relationships, and indeed elucidating its nature. It's the science of origins and connections. It's the quest to understand ourselves, the universe in which we live, and our place in it. And natural history museum collections preserve our biotic and cultural heritage. And so this is a pretty expansive view, but when you take a look at this definition, there's nothing about the past. The past is integrated in this, but this is very much about what we all do from the day we're born. We're a 2-year-old asking, what's that? What's this? As we go out and explore nature and we tug on one thing, and as John Muir said, find that it's connected to everything else in the universe. This is part of our unique human curiosity at trying to understand who we are and how we relate to the world around us. And I would posit that that's one of the most important relationships we can cultivate in people today, because the future of the planet very much depends upon it. So a lot of the stuff, we mentioned the collections. We have in our collection some incredibly important things. Now, I'd love to tell you that these 2 drawers are at the museum. They're not. But they're like what we have at the Museum of Natural History. If you take a look on the left side, you'll see the bird on the far left is an ivory-billed woodpecker next to 2 pileatids. And then on the right, you'll see 2 passenger pigeons next to 2 mourning doves. And it brings us, one of my areas that I've been fascinated with is the passenger pigeon and this dynamic force of nature, this biological storm, as Aldo Leopold called it. Something that very much was a part of the Ohio landscape. And it was an animal that literally darkened the skies. And even though it kind of looked like a mourning dove, like this mourning dove here on top of its squab, it was actually much more closely related to the band-tailed pigeon. But they used to talk about how in migration, they would darken the sky, a river of birds emanating from one direction and ending up going into another. And as a matter of fact, Audubon and Alexander Wilson, 2 of our great naturalist artists who helped document the avifauna of North America, particularly describing the wilderness that was Kentucky and Ohio and the frontier in the early 1800s, they talk about the passenger pigeon flights being so expansive, it's as if they were in eclipse. darkening the sun from horizon to horizon. Audubon estimated one flock to have 1 billion birds in it. Alexander Wilson estimated a flock at 2.1 billion birds. This is probably the most numerous bird on planet Earth. It was an amazing force of nature as it arrived in Ohio and places in the north in early February, just as soon as the snows would start to melt and uncover the mast, particularly the beech mast from the fall before. In those mast years, scout birds would find these rich forests, and then the birds would descend by the millions. They would nest by the millions. And indeed, one nesting colony of passenger pigeons covered 850 square miles of Wisconsin. 850 square miles of trees just laden with these sloppy stick nests, and hundreds of passenger pigeons in each one. They were highly synchronized. They would create their nests, mate, lay the eggs, hatch the eggs, raise the squabs, and the squabs would fledge, all within about a month and all at the same time. And it turns out that the passenger pigeon had a predator satiation model, kind of like a masting beech tree. The idea, flood the market every once in a while and then not allow the things that eat your fruits to be able to build up numbers and anticipate when you're going to have the next mass crop. Well, passenger pigeons, it turns out, were nomadic mass specialists. They nest in Summit County one year. You might not see them nesting again for another 5 or 6 years. But they were a force of nature. They were a force for disturbance that, in addition to things like beaver and fire, were very important in terms of creating a dynamic and healthy forest for lots of other organisms. And they were so numerous that everybody thought they needed no protection. And I just throw this because this is a uniquely Ohio thing. A committee reporting to the Ohio legislature in 1857 said this passenger pigeon needs no protection, wonderfully prolific and having the vast forests of the north as its breeding grounds, traveling hundreds of miles in search of food. It is here today and elsewhere tomorrow, and no ordinary destruction can lessen them or be missed from the myriads that are yearly produced. Let me introduce Buttons. Buttons is a preserved passenger pigeon that can be seen at the Ohio Historical Center in Columbus. And Buttons has the distinction of being one of the last free-living wild passenger pigeons shot by a young fellow, Presclay Southworth, down in Pike County, Ohio. And when he shot it, he took it in to show his mom, and mom said, "Hey, it's one of those, blue meteors. You ought to take it down to Sheriff Barnes's wife and see what she says." She's a taxidermist, it turns out. She stuffed him using buttons for the eyes. And Buttons, the specimen, ended up finding its way into the collection of the Ohio Historical Society. That was in 1900. 14 years later, the last of this species fell dead off its perch in its cage at the Cincinnati Zoo, 1 o'clock, September 1st, 1914. We know the date, we know the time, we know the location of the extinction of what was once the most numerous bird on planet Earth. If you come to our museum today, you can see a brace of passenger pigeons on a limb on display in our Sears Hall of Human Ecology. This is one of them. And they look like they could have been alive yesterday. You can see the iridescence on this male. You can see the spotting on the back and some of the colors that are in fact very similar or convergent with mourning doves. But yet this was a much larger bird that could swallow acorns and beech nuts, and it now, quote unquote, only lives in the collections of natural history museums. Natural history museums definitely can show us the past, but also the cautionary tales from the past that we need to apply to today about what are we doing to, in fact, preserve what we have today. The museum at its heart has got collections. This is our curator emeritus of vertebrate zoology, Tim Matson, showing folks off the VertZoo collection in the museum. We've got lots and lots of things that are preserved, some 5 million plus objects that represent the best of mostly Ohio and regional natural and cultural history, though we do have some stuff from around the world. We've got some impressive exotic specimens in our ornithology collection, which is curated by Dr. Andy Jones. And these collections are not only these mementos, if you will, or tokens. These voucher specimens are very important for establishing where these species exist in time and place, and they're very important for study. We also have vast collections of preserved animals, taxidermed animals, which our exhibit designers can pull out and turn into really convincing displays that are engaging, because kind of that's what we're all about, is trying to engage our audiences in the life of natural history and the natural sciences. We also have some truly famous animals. This is the most famous dog in the world. Well, we think so. This is Balto the Hero Dog of the 1925 Serum Run to Nome, Alaska. Balto was the lead dog of the last team that delivered the serum to stricken Nome and helped save the Eskimo children there. Became an international hero at the end of that serum run, toured the lower 48, appearing in vaudeville theaters, including here in Cleveland. But ultimately, he and his team members got sold to a dime museum in LA, where only men could see them by paying a dime to go see what was behind the curtains in the back of a dingy, dark museum. And there was Balto and his 6 teammates harnessed to their sled in this dingy, terrible place. And a Cleveland businessman by the name of George Kimball saw this, was outraged, and created a fundraising effort involving school kids and kennel clubs back here in Cleveland, spearheaded by the Cleveland Plain Dealer, that raised enough money to buy Balto and the team members so they could come to Cleveland and live their life out at the Cleveland Zoo. And then when Balto died of old age, the decision was made that he should be taxidermed so that he could continue to inspire generations in the future. So the museum's got lots and lots of preserved stuff, and that stuff forms the heart of our scientific collections upon which original research is done. And it's also important for drawing from that to be able to tell the stories of nature and of science and provide those entry points in engaging our audiences. But one thing a lot of folks don't know that we have is that we actually have another living collection. Only this collection is real life habitats. This happens to be the Singer Lake Bog, which is a large bog complex near the Akron-Canton International Airport. It's one of the largest bog complexes in the state of Ohio, and it was threatened with destruction and with development and draining and destruction. In the late 1990s, the museum raised the money to acquire about 350 acres. Not only does it have these open kettle bogs, it has tamarack, it has insectivorous plants, it's got 25 acres of quaking bog with leverleaf, it's got a sand barrens, a great blue heronry, it's got the largest diversity of dragon and damselflies in the entire state of Ohio, and it's now part of the natural areas collection of the museum and will be maintained in perpetuity in its natural state. And so the museum over the years, starting in 1956 with the acquisition of a bog in Geauga County, Fern Lake, has been slowly, but with increasing speed in the last 20 years, acquiring natural areas so that we now have a portfolio of many of the habitats which are typical of northeastern Ohio in their sort of pre-human contact state. We have virgin forest, we have hemlock swamps along the Grand River terraces. We have sand barrens of an ancient beach line of Lake Erie. We've got an awful lot of property on Kelly's Island. Matter of fact, we are the second largest landowner after the state of Ohio on Kelly's Island, including a really neat and wild part of the Lake Erie shoreline near Long Point called Bufflehead Bay, the base of Long Point, where we do Tom Bartlett does bird banding every spring and fall. He does his owl banding in the fall and does extensive banding of spring migrants. So it's a great place not only to be preserved, And in some cases, some of these properties are open to the public. Mentor Marsh Nature Preserve in Mentor, the North Kingsville Sand Barrens, and the Sheeley Preserve in Kelly's Island. But they're also there to be to perpetuate these habitats and the unique species there into the future, and then for us to continue to be able to learn from them and study them and monitor and measure them, see how they fare with the relentless onset of climate change and the myriad assaults on all of our natural communities here in Ohio by invasive species and pathogens. I mean, we're all, just devastated by what's happening with our American beech trees and beech leaf disease, which was actually identified by John Pagoshnik out at Lake Metro Parks in 2012, and now is spread across, I think, 3 or 4 states and Ontario. And, this most iconic member of the beech maple forest could be threatened by that. And we are monitoring also, the influx of hemlock woolly adelgid and elongate scale and other threats, oak wilt, and it's kind of like the lessons that we thought we learned in the early 1900s with the American chestnut blight and with the Dutch elm disease. It's been revisited on us in spades due to global commerce and our inability to track and monitor and intervene in a timely fashion. So this collection of natural areas now numbers almost 60 nature preserves, and it's just shy of 12,000 acres. So this is one of the most unique collections of the Museum of Natural History, and one I'm incredibly proud that the museum has. We've also tried to be involved and at the leadership in efforts to steward the properties that we have. You might know that Mentor Marsh used to be a tremendous estuary, an old bend of the mouth of the Grand River that was cut off 400 or 500 years ago, and it became just the largest estuarine marsh, east in the east part of the Lake Erie shoreline in Ohio. And the museum spearheaded efforts to acquire it, but unfortunately, because salt spoils were deposited on one of its feeder streams and potash, it was turned brackish, and Phragmites australis got in there and basically took over the entire marsh. And we thought it was doomed, but thanks to lots of partners like ODNR and like Ohio EPA and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, we have in fact undergone over the last 6 years a comprehensive assault on these invasive species. And Mentor Marsh is back. It's unbelievable. The biological diversity is there. And if you are looking for, you want to see Nelson's sparrows, if you want to see one of the best places to see rails, the Virginia rails and soras, sometimes you have to yield the boardwalk to the rails. It's just turned out to be an unbelievable success in terms of if you do fight these invasive species and keep them at bay, not only will the seeds of the original plants emerge, but lots of the original animals that were there, the original species that were there, will return. And we now see sandhill cranes, and there's nesting bald eagles, and huge numbers of waterfowl use it. It's just a great, great success story. So the museum is very committed to the stewardship of the properties it's got. And we are one of the founding members of the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership for Biodiversity, which many of you are aware of. And this is a wonderful organization of governmental agencies, of non-governmental agencies, conservation groups. And it's not, CEOs sitting around. It's all land managers and folks that have a vested interest in safeguarding the integrity of the properties that are entrusted to them against these common threats, and see how we can share best practices and work collectively. Museum has been involved in other things with the Ohio Division of Wildlife over the years. We've tried to help out with monitoring with the peregrine falcons in the terminal tower. We actually built the first nest tray that was used a long, long time ago, and it's since been replaced. But the idea is we're very interested in the nature that's not only in the regions surrounding the city, but also in the city itself. And because this is the city we call home, and of course there's the iconic terminal tower. We're all about engagement. We're all about trying to create opportunities both in the field and on campus with totems and mementos and icons and exhibits and specimens from the natural world so that we can try and inspire in the next generation, and actually in this generation too, ignite a curiosity for the natural sciences. And we do that in all of the activities that we do. It's been a little tougher in the last year. We did reopen to the public on July 1st with one-way traffic flow, only our main level galleries open. Our interactives were converted to foot switches, which was pretty ingenious. So probably about 30% of the audience that we had before the pandemic is allowed to come through, but it's certainly cramped our style like it's cramped everyone else's style. And then we also have a commitment to sustainability. Now, we did create the Green City Blue Lake Institute, and it's part of a master plan about how its mission is going to go forward. But one of the things that we were really proud of is in 2011 and 12, we built a passive home. This is a super insulated house that is 2,800 square feet and does not require a furnace in northeastern Ohio because it's got walls that are R30, ceilings that are R70, windows that are R11. It was tight as a box, but it was still healthy because of heat exchangers. And we introduced this technology as a demonstration project associated with a climate change exhibit we did at the time. And to showcase this, the fact that there are solutions to reducing our dependence upon fossil fuels and addressing the root cause of climate change. And this was opened up right by the Stegosaurus on the museum grounds on what is now the Perkins Wildlife Center that I'll be getting to. And then ultimately, when that exhibit was done, it was relocated to an insulated foundation on Wade Park Avenue, rather, a couple blocks away, and then it was sold, and people live in it to this day. And it's a beautiful house, and it was done as a way of showcasing something that you see all over the place in Europe. This was introducing those technologies to northeastern Ohio, and I'm really happy to say that it helped catalyze interest in this approach, and the architectural community has really responded. So, we are all about dinosaurs, but a lot more. And I mentioned before a little bit about the scientific research that we do. This is Dr. Michael Ryan. He has left the employ of the museum, is now working up in Canada, but during his about 12 years with the museum, generally twice a year, he would publish on and describe a brand new species of dinosaur. And it's the idea that not only do we have these collections, not only are we using them to engage our audiences, but we have original scientific research that's being done and published in refereed journals. And you can see some of the preparation that takes place on these amazing specimens we've got. This was the late Dale, and he was a volunteer in our paleontologist department, and he was tasked with preparing this block of rock that had all these Coelophysis dinosaurs. And Dale Zielinski, armed with the straw that you see in his mouth and a dental pick, over 8 years would pick away at the matrix and go with the straw to blow the dust away, pick, blow, until he had revealed all of the bones in the top surface of this block. It's just an amazing effort in preparation. And one skeleton was removed and was mounted as on display on the museum galleries. One of the things that we're most known for is our research in paleoanthropology. And this is Dr. Donald Johanson, who in 1974 actually discovered the Lucy fossil. This is the most complete and oldest specimen, the ancestor of humans at the time, and really revolutionized paleoanthropology. And Lucy, for 5 years, lived in the museum. She's now in the National Museum at Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where she belongs. But this created a whole expertise in paleoanthropology that continues to this day with Dr. Johannes Haile Selassie, who has probably more notches in his trowel than anybody in paleoanthropology, including any member of the Leakey family. He is holding a picture of some fossils that he discovered, something new to science called Katanumu, Australopithecus garhi. On the left is the remains of that Katanumu, and on the right you see the cover of Science magazine from October in 2009. The entire issue is devoted to the description of Ardipithecus ramidus, who you see on its cover. Johannes was the one who found the first bones of that, and Science magazine decided that that was the premier scientific discovery of all discoveries in science and medicine in the year 2009. So is an incredible guy and maintains this excellence in paleoanthropology. You see it made the cover in December when it was named the breakthrough. There's Johannes in the field. And part of that research is based on one really curious collection we have, and that's the collection called the Hammond Todd collection that has some 3,500 human skeletons as well as hundreds and hundreds of great apes. And it's a very, very important collection, not only for trying to figure out who we are and how we're related to chimpanzees and gorillas, but also it's used in the medical sciences. We do active field work in the region and in archaeology. Dr. Brian Redman leads a very active field program that's focused on knowing who the first Ohioans were, the Native Americans that populated the state back in, from 12,000 years ago until time of European contact. Because for many of those people, all we know about them is through the study of their material culture. There isn't any written descriptions of them because there was no writing. They were not encountered by Europeans. So that archaeology is very important for understanding who these folks were and how they lived in these primeval habitats. Some of our research is as state-of-the-art as it gets. This is Dr. Gavin Svenson, who is the Director of Research and Collections for the museum and our Curator of Invertebrate Zoology. And much of his work on the praying mantises of the world, of which he is basically redoing the entire systematics and classifications of them, is all based upon DNA and genomic analysis. Other kinds of things we do, I mentioned Tom Bartlett and banding saw-whet owls. This is gauging eye color. So that work goes on in the field in places like Kelly's Island. And then stream surveys, we have our vertebrate zoologists that work in the field. We have our botanists that work in the field, our invertebrate zoologists. The idea is to understand the distribution of living things in this region as best we can, both for edification of our current audiences, but also to create that record that's ever important going on into the future, whether it's working with mud puppies in the Grand River or other kinds of organisms. So the mother campus shows this view of our favorite dinosaur, Steggy, this wonderful fiberglass dinosaur that graces the entrance of our museum, looking towards the planetarium with its unique chamfered dome shape, which, by the way, the planetarium, if you stand in the right spot, is actually an astronomical sighting device, and you can use it to find the North Star. And then just to the left, you see coursing eagles, the wonderful bronze sculptures of flying bald eagles that were done by our late Assistant Director Emeritus and preparator taxidermist and wonderful sculptor Larry Izzard. We also have inside that planetarium lots of cool whiz-bang things, both through traditional projection and also digital projection on the ceiling, where the heavens come alive, and it really helps understand, our local and our cosmic neighborhoods. So museum really is about, life, the universe, and everything. And our mission statement is to inspire through science and education a passion for nature, the protection of natural diversity, the fostering of health, and leadership to a sustainable future. Well, a component of that is another living collection of the museum, and that's the live animals that we've maintained through the Ralph Perkins II Wildlife Center. And our coda here was just to provide knowledge, appreciation, and conservation of Ohio's wildlife resources and the living systems upon which they depend. And this is kind of a mission that I thought wildlife rehab, both lone rehabbers and rehab centers, and certainly nature centers, nature and science centers and zoos, this whole idea of, if we're going to truly create a conservation ethic, what we need to do is we have to create awareness. We have to create opportunities for people to know what's out there. And though it might be great to say we want to save the whales and the coral reefs and the tropical rainforests, I would submit that conservation starts at home. It starts with knowing the things in your backyard. And once you know about them, that leads to a sense of appreciation, empathy, interest in them. And that can form the foundation for a durable conservation, a sense of a conservation ethic. And that, of course, is, I think, the goal of all of us these days. So there's a much younger Harvey Webster with one of our great horned owls at the time, trying to engage a group of youngsters in our courtyard with, one of the the truly regal animals of the state, and that is the largest of our typical owls, the great horned owl. So in 1970, a family had approached the museum, and they had an interesting request, and it was based on a tragedy. Young Ralph Perkins II, in the summer of 1969, had drowned in a terrible, bizarre accident. And it turns out that Ralph had a huge interest in the out of doors. He was a hunterman, fisher person. He would, at age 17, he was guiding people in Alaska. He just was far more comfortable in the wild than he was, in a classroom, because he was a classmate of mine growing up, and I can attest to that. And he had this wonderful spirit of interest in the out of doors, and his family wanted to commemorate that and do something to share that passion that he had for the out of doors with others. And so they approached the museum about what could they do to kindle that interest in others. And the director at the time, Bill Shealy, said, well, we would love to have the presence on our campus of native wildlife, a small, modest display of some of the animals that are unique to the state of Ohio, maybe not unique to the state of Ohio, but are found in the state of Ohio, so that we can use those live animals to catalyze that interest. And you can see from the looks of these ladies here with the great horned owl, they're not looking at me, they're looking at the owl. We all know the amazing power that a living animal has to attract and hold the attention of our audiences. And we've all know it. We all do our best to try and take advantage of it. And we also know that we walk a fine line when we have an animal in captivity. It's really easy for people to glorify the captivity of the animal, or glorify the handler, to glorify, that kind of connection. I feel it's the other way around. We have this tremendous, abiding responsibility to provide context for the animals that we present, so that we are not glorifying their captivity. It's not their choice that they're there, but the fact that we can provide context for how these animals exist in nature, take advantage of that interest, and try and draw those folks in. And that's kind of the philosophy of the Perkins Wildlife Center. Well, back in 1970, the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center had some live animals out there. This is long before a lot of the wildlife rehabilitation centers got established. And in Cleveland, at least, the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo really wasn't, actually in 1970, it wasn't the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. Metro Parks hadn't taken over the Cleveland Zoo at that point. It was run by the city of Cleveland and the Zoological Society, but they focused on exotic and international species rather than local species. So this was a niche that we thought was there. Now, this idea of creating a center at the museum that would have had live animals, and this is an aerial view, or actually a view off the top of the roof of the Perkins Wildlife Center as it was laid out in 2003 after a major renovation there. But it really wasn't that far-fetched for the museum to get involved in the exhibit of live animals, in that in our history since 1920, time and time again, the museum had been involved in displaying live animals. For instance, in the early 1930s, we established the Trailside Museum at North Chagrin Reservation in what is now Cleveland Metro Parks, which was arguably one of the first nature centers in the United States. And it was set up as a small outlier or satellite of the Natural History Museum when the museum provided all the educational programs for Metro Parks. We had been commissioned not only to do programs, but also we helped lay out all the nature trails. And we had this close relationship under contract with the park board. So at each one of those, and quickly following the North Chagrin one, we had a Trailside Museum at Brexville and at Rocky River. And again, these are the forerunners of the nature centers in those various locations. But each one of them would have had a kestrel or a raccoon or a black rat snake or some live animal used to engage the audiences who would come through. And following that, and it built on that expertise and our relationship with the city of Cleveland, we were asked in 1940 to take over the management of the Cleveland Zoo. And from 1940 to 1956, the museum operated the Cleveland Zoo. And so it was a part of the constellation of things. We had satellite museums, trailside museums. We had the Cleveland Zoo. We had our location, which at the time was in two old mansions on Millionaires Row on Euclid Avenue in downtown Cleveland. And we also were responsible for starting the Holden Arboretum, which was again part of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History family until it was spun off in the early 50s as its own independent agency. So the museum had this long history. Not only that, but we actually operated the original Cleveland Aquarium for its entire existence of some, I think, 35 years until it closed in 1985 and its assets were transferred to the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. So again, recognizing the power of live animals to both attract and engage our audiences, to be able to open up conversations. It was natural to say, hey, let's create some little habitats along the east wall of the museum in this little woods garden and have some live animals. And so over the years, we had some birds of prey, we had white-tailed deer, we had fox and raccoon. And the idea was not to have a comprehensive selection of wildlife, but rather animals, particularly animals that represented great Ohio conservation success stories. And early on, at least when I started in 1974, they had the rudiments of a wildlife rehabilitation program. It was kind of casual at the time and operated under scientific collecting permits as opposed to wildlife rehabilitation permits. But the animals were brought to the museum. The museum did its best to try and rehabilitate them, though rehabilitation was a little cruder than it was then in the hands of you experts today. But the animals that could not be returned to the wild oftentimes were then repurposed as educational ambassadors, either for exhibit or for educational programming. And here you see Huxley, one of our red foxes, and you see one of our barn owls, and you see the muzzle of Lucy, river otter, and a couple snowshoe hares. And we operated in that location. We had some modest enhancements here and there, a comprehensive redo that was done in 2003, but most of the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about what we did when we opened up the new Ralph Perkins II Wildlife Center and Woods Garden in 2016. You see, the museum was expanding, and they needed a place to put a parking garage, hate to say it. And the only flat place on our campus to put a parking garage was on the footprint of the Perkins Wildlife Center and Woods Garden. So we had a 2.5 acre plot on the south side facing the art museum with interesting topography. So we brought in an exhibit design company called Think out of New York City, and we set about using the same precepts. We wanted to display native wildlife. By this time, we haven't been doing wildlife rehabilitation since the early 80s. we were focused on other conservation activities, but we were really focusing, particularly with a remodel in 2003, of how can we create compelling exhibits that allow intimate experiences with the animals that we've got. How can we deepen the relationships with the animals so that they're not stressed by their captivity, but they really are outstanding ambassadors for their species, so that we can up the ante for the educational experience that we provide. And so that was the goal in 2003, and that was very much the foundation of what we wanted to create in 2016. The Cleveland Metro Park Zoo continues to focus on international wildlife more than Ohio. Now, the Akron Zoo, and you'll hear about this more later on from Shane Good, but the Akron Zoo's got some tremendous exhibits that showcase Ohio wildlife. But we had this niche, at least in Cleveland, that we felt that we wanted to up the ante in terms of the presentation of native wildlife in more habitat-style exhibits, and totally embrace the concept of enrichment with these animals to create not only outstanding opportunities for our visitors to be engaged with the animals, but outstanding enriching experiences for the animals themselves. So this is a model of what was laid out. So again, the main body of the museum is to the left there, the way that the exhibit designers had it is you would come out of the museum 2.5 stories above that ravine that comes down the left side of this land, and that you would have a series of these elevated trailways that would take you to sort of ground level exhibits. And in some cases, you would be above the animal exhibits, and then in some cases, the animals had options to be above you. So the idea was to create tremendous options, unexpected vistas, and intimate details. If you look at the far right, upper right corner, that is our Raptor Center, which is not open to the public, but that's where we hold the birds of prey that we use in our educational program. The two buildings that you see at the top center are our LSS, our life support system, and our otter holding. And then you can see that there's roughly a circular pathway with a gathering area in the middle that have wetlands, that have got exhibits built on the hillside, that have got lots and lots of different choices. And I hope a lot of you have had the chance to see the Perkins Wildlife Center because we think that it has delivered reasonably well on what we wanted to do. So here's one of our gray foxes in its enclosure. Now, first of all, that you see is that with the mesh we're using, you're looking right through it. And, you know, in our old Perkins, there would be exhibits that used a lot of pressure treated lumber and stockade style. We wanted to open things up as much as we could, utilizing durable mesh that was safe for the animals. So this is actually a braided stainless steel. And we were guided in the selection of the materials by a couple agencies. Think our exhibit designers. A through Z is a company out of Tucson, Arizona that did a lot of design build of our enclosures. And they're, and again, Shane can talk to this because they've done a lot of work for the Akron Zoo, but they're just incredibly gifted at creating environments in mesh, in metal, that really create great opportunities for visitor and for animal. So these two agencies were great. And then we had, we stole a lot from the Philadelphia Zoo with their aerial trailways that they use in their Zoo 360-degree installation, where a lot of their animals have opportunities to leave the enclosure. So this is a gray fox. Of course, gray foxes being one of the few tree climbing members of the canine family. And you can see them here he's in his home exhibit, but this ramp, and by the way, the ramp was made of white oak, a lightning damaged tree that had to be removed to be able to create the Perkins Wildlife Center. And we tried to repurpose all of the lumber, both black locust and this white oak that we could. So this is white oak ramp. And if he goes up to the top of the ramp, there is a shift door. And if we open it, he can actually access an aerial trailway where he's one story above the visitor, and he can be up there looking down on you, turning the tables on who's the observer and who's the observed. And this was part of the genius of this, was creating those opportunities. This is your first promenade. When you walk out, you follow this bridge, this elevated trailway. That's our eagle aviary that you see in the distance with these major mature trees emerging from the top. That's currently used as an exhibit of bald and golden eagle. And I will be quick to point out that, we are not a wildlife rehabilitation organization anymore, but we totally lean on the wildlife rehabilitation community because we want to populate our exhibits with animals that have come through a rehab center and cannot be returned to the wild. We are looking to tell those stories, those success stories, not only of the rehab centers, but of these animals of these are the ones that could not be returned to the wild. So in the case of the eagles on display, Midas, our golden eagle, ran into high tension wires in eastern Washington State, was rehabilitated at the Washington State University, vet school, and suffered damage to an eye and a wing. And so she's a permanent resident. And then Ashkate, our bald eagle, came from the Sarvey Wildlife Center also in the state of Washington, and was blown out of a nest at a young age, sustained permanent wing damage, and we got her when Sarvey decided they were going to repurpose their eagle aviary and get a golden eagle, and so she was kind of surplus to their needs. So the idea is that as you walk here, you see that the exhibits are embedded to the extent we could in the natural vegetation. We were blessed by having mature trees out there, cucumber magnolia, white oak, black oak, American beech, sugar maple. And all of the vegetation that we added is vegetation that would be unique to hemlock northern hardwood forests, to oak chestnut forests, as well as some wetlands that we've got. This is a drone view looking at our aviary, our Songbird Aviary, that has an area where the visitor actually can enter into it. This is similar to what the Akron Zoo has. And this is a home for native songbirds, also native waterfowl. There are ruffed grouse in here. There have been bobwhite quail, and a whole host of creatures. And the idea, just I think, as Shane can attest to with Akron, the whole idea of elevating the presentation of native animals to our audiences because they've got compelling stories to tell, whether it's about things like Lights Out Cleveland with the ruffed grouse, whether it's talking about what's happened with grouse populations and West Nile virus and overgrazing by deer and the loss of suitable habitat, and the fact that the challenges that some species are facing today are important stories to tell. And then I said we wanted to provide intimate encounters. This is one of our bobcats. So we obtained 2 bobcats back in 2002 from a rehabber in Tucson, Arizona, who specializes in cats, cougar and bobcat. And these were 2 that were found as kittens and hand raised and then deemed to be too tame to return to the wild. And here you can see the bobcat is snoozing on this mat that it loves, that is on a platform that is literally 12 feet from the face of the visitor. So it's unbelievably intimate. In the background, you can see that funny little tubular trailway snaking through the canopy of the shrubs there. That actually is available to the bobcat if it goes up its ramp and enters into that. And this is a really novel thing in terms of providing the animals abundant choices where they're not just stuck in a cage all the time. They have the decision to be where they most like to be. And it's really engaging for the animals and tremendously engaging for the visitor. Here you see Bob the bobcat is actually in the trailway on the upland. And there's about 200 feet of this circular trailway that can be made available to the bobcats, or we can wall it off, make it available to the gray foxes, or wall it off. We can make it available to the red fox or wall it off. We could actually make it available to our coyotes. So it not all at the same time, by the way, but it's marvelously flexible. And you just see the nature of these experiences that provides. And you can see also looking to the northwest how entirely open our site is to the Donebrook Valley. And we also want to talk about that sense of place of how these animals, some of them have been endangered. Now maybe they're species of special concern, but they're very much a part of the Ohio story. A lot of them have just incredibly compelling conservation stories behind them, and they're a part of the natural heritage of each and every person who comes through this museum. You can see this was Kelly, one of our raccoons. She has since passed away, but we have a Miko, our albino raccoon here. And you can see that there is a lot of infrastructure. Kelly here is in her raccoon enclosure. That big diagonal thing in the back is actually a chute that the coyotes can use to get up on top of a roof to enter an aerial trailway. So you see just how dynamic this landscape is, and it's only 2¼ acres. In some cases, you see the folks on the right are on a railing and they're looking down, into our coyote yard. And the coyotes have 7,500 square feet of real estate, but it's over 2.5, actually almost 3 stories of space, coming up this hillside, entering that chute, and actually given opportunities to be above the visitor. This is one of our coyotes, Red. Now, we knew that when we were planning this, we needed to get special animals, and it wasn't just a matter of getting any coyote orphan. And I know that I worked with Kristen on trying to find orphans. We actually, through the IWRC, found an outfit in northern Texas that had, they actually had 4 orphans, and this is such a fabulous story. It turns out this female coyote was running across a highway one night, didn't stop, look, or listen, got hit by a car. The driver of the car was a wildlife biologist, so bummed. He pulls off to the side of the road to see if the coyote's okay. Coyote's not. Hit in the head, killed instantly. But as he examines the coyote, he sees that she is heavy with pups. He can see the pups moving in her belly. He actually reaches down and expresses colostrum from one of her teats. So he knows that birth is almost imminent. And being the son of a veterinarian who had assisted his father doing emergency C-sections, this is a true story, folks, he pulls out his knife, slices her open, and delivers 4 healthy pups on the side of the highway. They are transferred to this wildlife rehabilitation center. By definition, they have to be hand-raised. And even though they are introduced with other coyote orphans, they end up being too tame, and they determine that it's inappropriate to return them to the wild. So we got wind of this, and we sent staff down to evaluate whether we thought they'd be appropriate for us, because we knew that having coyotes that would tolerate having people over them on this aerial trailway was important. And so we got 3 of the 4, and they're just remarkable animals. We got them when they were about 5 months of age. They were incredibly tame, very interactive, and totally tolerated people having people above them. And it's been one of the great successes of the Perkins Wildlife Center that we've been able to showcase coyotes in such a dynamic way. And of course, you know, every one of the species we have, we want to get a message across, but clearly with coyotes, you know, talk about a misunderstood animal. Everybody, you know, they're afraid of them, or they think that they're totally negative in the environment. You know, this is the most persecuted animal possibly on the North American continent ever. And, you know, they're amazingly intelligent. The research that Stan Garrett has done up in the city of Chicago, Stan from Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, is just fabulous, showing that they're monogamous, you know, they mate for life, you know, they're extraordinary good family animals, and how intelligent they are, how they exploit these amazing in-between habitats that exist in the heart of our most urban habitats. They freely coexist with us. And for the most part, as long as you always have your small dogs on a leash and you keep your cats indoors, for the most part, we can live happily alongside them and never have any negative interaction. And to hear them singing at night, the greatest common name of a coyote is the song dog, is just the spirit of wildness. And that this is when people see them and they see them in this encounter, they feel safe, the coyotes feel safe. The coyotes are interacting. They're expressing their innermost coyote behaviors, but also those behaviors that are universal to the members of the dog family and are so familiar to all of us. It changes people. They get out there and they see this, and you can just see it changes how they interpret what these animals are all about. And it's one of the exhibits I think I'm most proud of, even though it's built on a slope and we have huge erosion issues and sometimes we have fighting coyotes and all the rest of it. It just shows how if you can create these dynamic relationships, you can change people. You can change their attitudes. You can open them up to discovery and wonder. Another thing that we do, this is Miko, and he's pigging out on some overripe pumpkin in honor of Halloween, is we early on totally embraced the concept of enrichment. And we knew in old Perkins, our exhibits weren't that small, so it was incumbent upon us to try and make those environments as stimulating as we possibly could, because we know it's so important for the welfare of the animal. It's key for animals that are well adjusted to captivity. It's key to prevent the repetitive behaviors like pacing. And we committed to it early on, and particularly we enrich all the animals at the museum, including our reptiles, but for particularly our mammals, we do 2 to 3 enrichment sessions a day, sometimes more. We are totally committed to this. We don't repeat enrichments over a 3 to 5 day period. Enrichment can be anything from, varying up the diet, to sensory stimulation, to rearranging the furniture, to bringing in things from other animal exhibits. And we are totally, totally committed to that. Other intimate things, here's one of our turkey vultures. And again, the visitor is this picture is taken inside the enclosure, but the visitor is about 5 feet away from a turkey vulture. We also are very proud of the relationships that develop between our animal collection and our wildlife staff. And you can see that with the coyote on the left and the porcupine on the right. We work hard to develop these relationships because it's really important for the well-being for the animals. Of course, it's what floats the boat for the people that work at the museum. And it always makes sure that you've got animals that are far better adjusted to life at the museum. And it also provides fascinating selfie opportunities like this one with Ashkate with her head turned around. And then it also allows you to give great nose shots, whether it's a coyote or a bobcat or a snowshoe hare or Thistle, the whistle pig. Some of the other interesting enrichment that, we sometimes think about, well, how involved does enrichment have to be? Well, we love taking rugs or blankets or towels, for instance, that one animal has slept in, and then giving them to another. And the coyotes in particular love things that the foxes have been on, or particularly the otters. And if they get an otter towel, they just go crazy. And for a half an hour, 40 minutes, instead of being bored, they're actively rubbing back and forth and sniffing and totally engaged in this. And it is a marvelous thing, and it's incredibly effective for our visitors to see this. Because, the whole point of enrichment, is not only the welfare aspect of it, but it's also to get the animals to showcase their innate behaviors. And that makes the experience for the visitor that much richer. We talked about little food enrichment. And by the way, we shamelessly put, Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Cavaliers memorabilia in here at all times. You never know when you might get support from a sports team. It's amazing how effective an old box can be. Bobcats are just like any other cats. Cardboard has a universal fascination for them. Our river otters, really proud of the work that the museum staff has done with the river otters. We have 3 now. And that all three of them in 2 installments are animals from the wild. These are animals that were trapped in the bayous of DuPont, Louisiana, and they were trapped legally because in DuPont, Louisiana, you have the epicenter of crayfish farming. And the enemy of crayfish farming are mink, raccoons, and otters. And so the farmers are actively employing folks to remove these animals. There's a gentleman in Ohio who works with one of the trappers to make sure that he doesn't kill the ones he catches, but hangs on to them, and then he holds them at quarantine and places them for a substantial fee, but places them in North American zoos. So we've got Linus in 2009, and we've got Calvin and Hobbes about 4 years ago. It's a bachelor group, but these animals who were all wild, free-living river otters are so food motivated that in short order, they are doing all sorts of behavior. Their station training, their kennel training, and not only, we're not trying to train them to do tricks, but the station training is important to be able to train the individual animals when they're in a common exhibit. And the kennel training is critical to us because our veterinarians are off campus. And so oftentimes we have to take the animals to our vets, to Dr. Rob Nathan at Sharon Center Veterinary Hospital or Dr. Jamie Lindstrom at Animal Clinic Northview. And so we need to have animals that are trained to voluntarily kennel so that we can move them around. And of course, having river otters on display is so incredibly important to talk about the amazing job the Ohio Division of Wildlife did at restoring river otters to the state of Ohio, and how successful that restoration was, and this amazingly iconic mustelid, and what a great emblem of the quality of our wetlands and our riversheds and watersheds. It's a great thing, you know, and of course they're so very, very playful. And even when they're relaxing in their holding cage and eating on a big piece of herring, you know, it looks like they're in their Barcalounger. It's just great fun. And here you can see one of the otters up on an inverted tub, which actually is the station. So there's 3 tubs. And so on command, when you ask them to go stationed and we clicker train them, they will come and do so. So it's a great success. And you can see there's about 2/3 of the exhibit is dry land and about 1/3 of the exhibit is underwater. You can see Scarlet, our red fox rather, that thinks she's a gray fox because she likes to inhabit the highest points of the exhibits we have. Here is Lancelot, Sir Lancelot, our porcupine. Now, he did come from a breeder from out of state, but we thought that porcupines were an important animal to showcase because, you know, we're right on the border of their range, and, you know, they're probably in Trumbull and Ashtabula County. And they definitely were part of the state's fauna originally, and they're just a fascinating animal. Talk about this incredibly long-lived and amazing rodent that, because of its quills, can go through life with impunity. And we even have a raven that we got from the SPCA of Monterey, California. It clearly had been hand-raised and dumped at the city park, and Blackjack would go around begging for food from people, and if you didn't feed him, there would be consequences because he'd attack your shoes and your feet. And so he came into captivity and then ultimately came to us. And of course, it's been incredible to see the return of ravens to the state of Ohio, both in East Central Ohio now, especially up in Northeastern Ohio. We're seeing them more and more frequently. So a great return of an animal that was part of the original avifauna. And then one of the things that, of course, of having the animals is that what are the tools and techniques we can use to engage our visitors? So one idea that we came up with early on was this concept of parallel play. So how can we create opportunities for a physical conversation between our wildlife and our visitors? And in this case, create a trailway for the kids so they can either emulate the bobcats or the bobcats can emulate them. And it adds an era of interactivity to it. And we have a slide next to our otters where the river otters have a slide, and we have a place where you can try and perch like a crow or a raven, which is a fabric strap between 2 posts, or climb like a coyote. And these are just interesting places, or jump like a bobcat. These are just interesting places where we can try and create that interactivity where we can showcase the adaptations of the animals, but allow folks to physically interact with that. And then ultimately, it's just these amazingly intimate interactions that can be provided. So this is this big convex bubble on the acrylic of the otter exhibit, and the otters love to frolic in there, and you literally go nose to nose or sometimes nose to butt of a North American river otter. And it's just a great way to see these animals as elegant as they are in the water, you know, so streamlined with a powerful tail and the webbed feet, and somehow compare that to how they are on land, because they're awfully comical on land. It's a greater appreciation of the inherent interest, the adaptability, and the dignity of these animals. And that's something that we're definitely trying to convey. And so that's the kind of overview. I mean, we have snowshoe hares, and we have a walk-through wetland that has a whole variety of Ohio fish that you can see very interactively, either looking down into the wetland or looking through the acrylic. We have sandhill cranes. We have barn owls, a whole host of creatures. But one of the creatures that we're most familiar or most associated with over the years has been the bald eagle, because not only were we interested in the welfare of our native wildlife resources early on, whether it was through rehabilitation, whether it was through trying to transform our audiences with the experiences that we provided, but it was also how could we, with the resources that we have, affect the conservation and assist the Ohio Division of Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So when I started, we actually had bald eagles. We had 2 eagles in this big aviary in 1974 when I started. And I remember in December, one of those things that my wife would say, it's ain't my problem anymore. I get a phone call that the 2 eagles had been fighting. And so on a weekend, I wasn't at the museum. I hustle my butt down there and get to the exhibit and look out at an exhibit. And there in the snow is this bald eagle, a female that we had, Martha. And she's standing in the snow and this ominous red stain. And it turns out the red stain is George, our male. And she had knocked him to the floor of the cage and was standing on his back, plucking the feathers off his head, creating a truly bald eagle. And this was bad. And this came after months of fighting. And we finally said, screw it. We have to separate these birds for whatever reason. They are just totally incompatible. And we can't let them be with one another anymore. And a funny thing happened. Martha started warming up to Carl Lutzman, who was my first employee, a part-time high school graduate, and she ended up forming a pair bond with Carl and laid eggs the following spring. And we thought that was kind of curious. And I'd gone to Cornell University and was well aware of the success of artificial insemination with peregrine falcons, gerfalcons, and golden eagles. And we thought, well, we've got this great opportunity to try and artificially inseminate Martha and get eggs. So we would go out every morning, poor George, who'd be in this other cage, and we would grab him and we would do the turkey squeeze, as we call it, what you do with an adult tom turkey in a turkey farm. And you basically apply pressure to the sides of the abdomen, hoping that there might be some semen in the vas deferens, and you might be able to express it from the cloaca and harvest whatever reproductive product was there. So we did that. We did that for the better part of almost 10 days. And George's response to all this was not to produce semen, but to lay an egg, which we were the laughing stock of the entire region at the time. How could we be so bozo as to misidentify this bird as a female, as a male, when it was in fact a female? Well, you know, in all fairness to us, it turns out that George was a southern race female, and those birds are smaller. The females are about the size of our Great Lakes males, but had gone north for the summer, was shot in Illinois. And so when we got George from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from a game refuge in Illinois in 1973, the thought was, well, this is a Great Lakes male. And they paired him with a female that came from the Jasper-Pulaski State Wildlife Area in Indiana, Martha. And if you've ever been, you probably have heard about that for the staging sandhill cranes they get every year. Anyway, they thought this was a perfect pair to set us up to hopefully try and breed eagles in captivity to provide the Ohio Division of Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service offspring for placement in wild nests to help facilitate the conservation of eagles in Ohio. Well, long story short, we now had 2 egg-laying bald eagles. Unfortunately, we were vandalized in 1977. Georgette was killed. But we were fortunate in getting a male from the University of Minnesota Raptor Center, male by the name of Argus, and we were successful some 7 years later in mastering the art of artificial insemination utilizing crippled males, and the result was we were able to produce eaglets from 1984 till 1999 rather. Sometimes they were from products of our birds, from Martha, and other times they were eggs that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ohio Division of Wildlife would bring us from wild nests where they were worried that one member of the pair had been killed and they probably couldn't successfully incubate the eggs, and we would incubate them, puppet raise them, and then return them to the wild. And this was the last clutch we had. These are 3 birds from the same clutch. And you notice the size difference. The oldest, the first to hatch, is on the left, the middle one on the right. And you see the puny guy in the middle, he actually developed a coliform infection of his crop. And it's not that he lost any weight. For about 3 days, though, he didn't grow. And that's how much he lost in terms of how fast eagles grow in the wild. Anyway, long story short, all 3 of these were successfully introduced into wild nests in the state of Ohio, indeed with all the other eaglets we produced by the Ohio Division of Wildlife, and they all helped facilitate the recovery of bald eagles in the state of Ohio, and we're immensely proud of that. And we're immensely proud that we were able to do it with one of our animals that was actually on public exhibit, even though there was an awful lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that was done. So it's so gratifying nowadays to see how successful bald eagles are in the state, and to know that with the ODOW census from last year that we've got more than 700 nests, and they are almost everywhere, and it's just a gratifying sight to see. We also have assisted the Ohio Division of Wildlife with peregrine falcons in downtown Cleveland. On the terminal tower in particular, we created the first nest box there for the original nesting pair and helped remove a hybrid, a prairie falcon, peregrine falcon hybrid that had escaped from a falconer and was the first female at the site, but she was sterile and couldn't lay eggs. And so we helped ODOW capture her and remove her from the wild so that we finally got successful reproduction at Terminal Tower site. So again, that's really gratifying. What all this comes down to is live animals, as every one of you knows, are incredibly powerful tools for engaging not only children, but adults. We're all about the business of lifelong learning. And I love this Carl Sagan quote. Every kid starts out as a natural-born scientist, and then we beat it out of them. But a few trickle through the system with their wonder and enthusiasm for science intact. And boy, when you see kids interacting with, whether it's a live spider or a dinosaur or all of the different ways, we are hopefully creating the future scientists that will transform the world in the future. And I know that the interns and the staff that come through, the students that come through all of your programs, this is such an important thing we do, in addition to galvanizing interest and catalyzing that spark of wonder in our natural wildlife resources. And the last few slides I have, I give you this one. Everyone knows this quote. It's just such a great quote from Baba Diome, who is an ecologist from Senegal. And way back in 1968, that's before the first Earth Day, he came up with a line, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we'll understand only what we are taught." And in that, he's not talking about, classroom teaching. It's about those opportunities for engagement, those things that ignite our passion for wonder, for the natural sciences. And that forms the foundation from which both understanding, appreciation, and yes, say even love will come. And the bigger picture is that this is an incredible world we live on. It's the only place, as far as we know, that life occurs in the universe. Though maybe the rover Perseverance will give us some inclination about whether there was ever life on the watery surface of Mars 3.5 billion years ago. But where people sometimes take a look at the Earth as this infinite and unbounded resource, it's really important to recognize just how finite it is. I show you this. Here's the globe with that blue spot on it. That blue spot represents all the surface water on planet Earth. So if you coalesce all of the oceans, all of the lakes, all of the rivers into a sphere, that's how big it is. And you might say to yourself, oh, come on, how is this even possible? We're 70% water. We have these deep oceans. But remember, compared to the actual size of the planet, it's nothing. It's just a surface veneer. And further, if you go and take a look at how much is fresh water, it's that little blue marble in the middle, and lakes and rivers are that tiny little speck at the bottom. And we know that we are so blessed because here we are living right next to the Great Lakes, 20% of the Earth's fresh water right out our back door. And what an amazing resource that is. But we take these resources for granted, and we shouldn't, because they are not limitless. They're not unbounded. And we know now that things that happen here can infect life around the planet. And if you actually take the atmosphere of planet Earth and coalesce it into a sphere, it's the size of that pink glob on the right. And basically all life as we know it operates in those two spheres. So when you think about all life in this funny little diagram, shows Earth's birth in the middle at the bottom, and then over the course of time radiating out, you see the amazing radiation of all of the different living things and how, basically we've got mammals and then ultimately primates and then ultimately us emerging just in the last 200,000 to 300,000 years. And this is the story of life, and this extraordinary lattice work is what the current biodiversity is dependent upon. And if we allow extinction, thinking back to that passenger pigeon, not only are you having the extinction of the passenger pigeon, but you're also causing the extinction of anything that it could have ever evolved into in the future. You're snuffing it out. Here you can actually see some gaps in the record, which are places where mass extinctions happen, where an asteroid hits into the Earth, or we have incredible volcanism, like at the end of the Permian, that totally changes the atmosphere of our planet and causes 90% of living things to become extinct. Well, some people, as you know, have you probably heard that some people say that we're going through a sixth extinction now, only we humans are the meteorite. We humans are the asteroid. We are what's causing that extinction. So it just reminds us that we have to be ever diligent about this planet that we live on. And that, we're all, seems in this day and age, we all pretty tribal, we're pretty nationalistic, whether we're coveting vaccine or worried about who's getting across our borders. But the fact of the matter is that we are living beings on this planet. We are a product of organic evolution, and we are kin to every other living thing on this living planet. That's our shared inheritance. That's our natural heritage. And that's something that each and every one of us have an extraordinary stake in, and something that I think as rehabilitators, as folks who do educational programs with wildlife, that as nature centers and zoos and science centers, that this business we're involved with is incredibly important. Might I say even vital in terms of trying to get this message across to the broadest audience we possibly can. And I end up with this one, I love this quote. from T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets. He says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Ever walked out into your yard, a place that you've stepped thousands, tens of thousands of times before, and noticed something for the first time, and how that's opened up a door of wonder, of curiosity, of knowledge? That's the gift of nature to all of us, and our responsibility is to do our best to take care of it. And I thank you very much. Let's see if I can get out of this. Am I back?
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Wonderful presentation, Harvey. Anybody have any questions to ask Harvey?
Everybody probably needs a biological break. It's probably what everybody needs.
Yeah, I have a question, Harvey.
Sure.
It's every time I visit Perkins, I think about this, so I've been dying to ask you. Has anyone ever been peed upon by a prowling bobcat from above? And if so, is it as lucky as being pooped on by a bird?
No, but that's the amazing thing, because if it does happen, then it truly will be an immersive exhibit.
Excellent response.
When it's interesting, when we talked to the folks at the Philadelphia Zoo, we asked them that. They had issues because they have primates, and so there was concern about zoonotic transmission, so that they had to make sure that there were gutters, or there were that they could divert it. But we didn't have any such barrier with ours, with the animals that we had, so we just went with it, and to date we haven't had any issues.
Well, it looks like OWRA would like you to present at some point. So, it's a great group of people. When you were talking about the coyotes, Harvey, I made a comment there in the chat box saying I got to watch you interact with the coyotes, and just how interesting it was seeing that whole process. It's like they know who you are as soon as you step outside.
What was amazingly gratifying, Lori, was that we had Stan Garrett up at the museum. He was giving a talk for a group, and he had arranged to spend the afternoon with Michelle and I, and we had him, in all aspects of our coyote-ness there. And to see, I mean, this guy knows everything about coyotes. To see, he was blown away. Just the ability to interact, he knows coyotes so well, but so much of the experience is not with the animals in captivity, and not with the animals that are running away from you, but responding to you and interacting. And that's the cool thing, because clearly the coyotes, we are part of their pack or their family or what have you. And you all know this, when you get that special entree into an animal where you get to be that species, you get to interact on a level that we just don't get when we're looking at our bird feeders or bird watching, or when we're going to a vernal pool or any other way. And, that's the magic. That's what kept me at the museum for 46 years. And even though there were lots of different responsibilities thrown at me in my job, it all came back to the core thing of working with the live animals. So
I can understand that. Well, it looks like I don't see any questions, but lots of wonderful comments. We'll go ahead and I don't have it on the agenda, but we'll go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break just so people can stretch their legs, get up and walk around for a minute or two, and then we'll reconvene.